I like watching people fight. In animation, staged contests, virtual contests, and sometimes real contests. But there are parts of fighting culture that bother me, and I'm still trying to unpack them. Martial arts is a huge, ancient, awesome thing, but its most public gatekeepers encourage men to act not cool? I wanted to examine those macho ideals by surveying the fighting game dudes who didn't fit the hyper-masculine mold. Necro, Li Shaolin, Faust, Belial, the list goes on. But no matter where my research took me, I always got pulled back to an inescapable, singular figure, and the contradictions that he embodies. Voldo. What is up with Voldo? He's haunted us ever since he first wriggled into our lives in 1995. Everything about him is evasive, slippery, and hard to pin down. I mean his character, his combat game plan, and his reasons for existing. Here's what the games tell us. Voldo is a character from the Soul Edge and Soul Calibur fighting games. He's one of 5 characters who have appeared in all 7 entries. He's a warrior who's implied to be blind and mute, either by natural causes or from all the stuff stuck to his head. He's the obsessive servant of an Italian weapons merchant, Verci de Napoli, who gets very rich and then loses most of his fortune in the Italian Wars. After that, Verci becomes more and more paranoid, and he makes plans to hoard the remainder of his wealth in an underground vault called the Money Pit. He pays some poor contractors to build it for him, and when they're done, Voldo ensures the vault's secrecy by killing them. Another case for strong unions. Not long after that, Verci dies, and the Money Pit becomes his tomb. Voldo stays there as its guardian, using his trademark katana to chop up anyone who comes snooping around. He's a servant to a dead master, protecting wealth he'll never enjoy, living his life in cold and darkness. He also does a funny dance. So yeah, he's got this grim, dark origin story that really doesn't explain his whole deal. Voldo is an oddity. He's unusual, he's beloved, and he inspires questions. What's with all the wiggling? What's with the clothes? Is he, that's up to us to figure out. So let's start with what we can see: leather and grace. Voldo usually wears some assortment of skin-tight leather straps, harnesses, fishnets, and devices meant to constrict, blind, or gag him. It's BDSM gear. To really understand why and how this got into Soul Calibur, we've got to go back to World War II.
Welcome back to the stage of history.
Gay men have always existed. The subculture's assumptions and stereotypes differ from region to region and era to era, but in the 1940s, in the United States, the semi-modern idea of the gay man had been codified enough that a subset of gay men were ready to rebel against it. So, a subculture emerged. Leather culture is a lot of things to a lot of people, but one of the core elements was an exploration or adoption of an extreme form of masculinity. Pretty much every guy had served in World War II, or at least been exposed secondhand to the hyper-masculine hierarchy of the military. The movement was inspired by that, and by Marlon Brando's badass leather-clad biker dude character in The Wild One. The scene spawned bars and motorcycle clubs. Leather was a lifestyle, and for a lot of people that included the kink side too. Leather culture and BDSM culture were tightly bound, if you will excuse the pun. Leather and chains would bleed out into other scenes. In the late 1970s, British god of metal Rob Halford was the lead singer of Judas Priest. Rob was gay and very aware of the leather scene. When he adopted the leather daddy look for his stage gear, other bands and fans imitated. All of a sudden, this look was a gay thing and a heavy metal thing. Different kinds of people were enjoying the same masculine symbols for really different reasons.
Judas Priest! Leave your girlfriends at home or something.
But how did all this Western queer and metal culture make its way into a fighting game developed in Japan in the mid-90s? I couldn't find any recorded answers from the game developers, but if I had to make an educated guess, I'd say it arrived by way of Hellraiser. Hellraiser is a psychosexual horror movie written and directed by Clive Barker, who is also a gay man. When it was time to design his interdimensional sex gods, Clive Yoink created the Eldritch Leather Daddy look, inspired by punk and metal fashion and his own visits to S&M and leather clubs. For straight people who didn't go to metal shows or frequent Mapplethorpe exhibits, Pinhead was probably their first contact with eroticized leather. The movie was influencing pulpy Japanese media as early as Kentaro Miura's Berserk in 1991. And I mean, if you look at Voldo next to Pinhead or Butterball, the line is pretty clear. Other than the looks, Voldo and the Cenobites have another big thing in common. They were both monsters introduced to unsettle the audience's normie sensibilities. But a dedicated segment of the audience said, "These weirdos rule, give us more." By the third Hellraiser movie, the Cenobites were center stage, getting their own origin stories and redemption arcs. Just like there's no Hellraiser without Pinhead, there's no Soul Calibur without Voldo. He's always there, but that doesn't explain everything. I mean, I've never seen this in a Clive Barker movie. So let's talk about the moves. Let's talk about grace. The defining trait of Voldo's movement is grace, which sets him apart from a lot of male fighting game characters. He slithers along the ground, he gyrates, moves softly, and generally does stuff that the masculine gatekeepers have conditioned us to think of as frivolous and martial combat. But Voldo is still a threat. How do you fight a guy who does this? You could write it off as pure video game fantasy, but there are a handful of non-digital fighting men who have embraced grace. Muhammad Ali, perhaps the best fighter to have ever lived, proudly claimed that he could float like a butterfly. In the weird old days of MMA, Genki Sudo would wiggle his way around the ring, pop-locking and dancing. Over in his American UFC bouts, you can hear the commentators trying to rationalize his grace and flamboyance the only way their little masculine brains can, as a form of psychological warfare.
He's totally turning his back to him. And he can fight. He's not just crazy like this. This guy can really fight.
They just couldn't seem to comprehend that for this guy, fighting wasn't just about performing masculine dominance. It wasn't war. He was having fun, and he liked to dance. He retired from fighting with an impressive 16-4 record, but he's still dancing. Maybe the best historical parallel to Voldo came from the pro wrestling world. Outside the ring, he was known as Bernard Herrmann. He was a small guy, Jewish, came up as an amateur boxer, supposedly lived in a trailer full of fine books and records. In the ring, he was Ricky the Ballerina Star. The very idea of a male ballerina was provocative. Maybe it still is, I don't know when Billy Elliot came out. It was even more of a novelty to see a male ballerina in the context of combat.
Ricky Star, who in fact is a ballet dancer, is wearing ballet shoes.
He'd do his stretches, and after the bell, he'd literally dance circles around his opponent. They'd get more and more frustrated, and eventually he'd seize victory with some goofy act of brilliant grace. And just like Voldo, this outsider, this misplaced, incorrect kind of dude would become beloved. Even in front of working class crowds of 1950s wrestling fans, Ricky Star was a hero. Dance scholar Laura Katz Rizzo writes,
"Within his choreography, masculinity is not the opposite of femininity, but is instead a diverse range of characteristics along a spectrum ranging from graceful to strong. When Star/Herrmann flaunted a queer masculinity in the wrestling ring, he also exposed the distinctions between masculine and feminine as truly constructed presumptions."
Obviously, there are some differences. Bernard Herrmann's ballet thing wasn't just a bit for the wrestling ring. He legitimately studied and practiced the art. Star was a character that Herrmann created that explored and exploited the gender conflicts he himself embodied. Voldo is a character created by other people to titillate and provoke our normative gender feelings. But they share something important. They show that men, even in competitive, combative spaces, can express parts of themselves outside the masculinity starter kit of stoicism, efficiency, and strength. When Voldo goes toe-to-toe with Nightmare, or Mitsurugi, or Geralt, who is in the game for some reason, it's a tacit admission that the stoic ideal of masculinity is kind of bullshit. Get absolutely wrecked, Hemingway. Dudes like Voldo, Star, and Pseudo expose the truth, which is that fighting is kind of silly. It doesn't prove who's better or who's right. Despite what the UFC and WWE promo packages tell you, these guys aren't going to war, they're going to sport. And that sport is better and more interesting when the people who do it can be joyful and expressive and aren't forced into a generic masculine mold.
Joe, I'm going away from promos, and I'm just gonna be myself. Thank you, Alexander Gustafsson. You made me a better man and fighter tonight. I will forever be indebted to you.
In a world governed by toxic masculinity, there is a narrow set of ways guys are supposed to move. Our bodies are the most visible parts of us and the easiest to police. Anybody who has ever thrown a football wrong can attest to this. They will eat you alive. Growing up as a dude means other dudes will scrutinize the way you move through the world and punish you until you fall into line. Why do you walk like that? Why do you put your hands on your hips like that? Why do you hold your sandwich like that? It's exhausting. Once I was doing a stream with a sports site and somebody in the chat called me a beta and said it looked like I could barely hold my glass of water with my little praying mantis arms, which is an incredible roast. But come on, dude. To escape that scrutiny, you've got to find a way to be the right kind of man. And if you look at the leading men of fighting games, you can see a cartoonish embodiment of the desired masculine ideals. Bodies built for violence. They move in strong, straight lines, brutal, efficient, confident, dominant. Which is why Voldo is so compelling and unusual and charming. By merit of being a little freak, he's one of the only men freed from those limitations. He can wiggle and sway like a reed in the wind. He can be graceful. No man has ever dapped another man at the gym and said, "Bro, I admire your grace." But they should. It would be nice. That's where I'm going with this. It makes me wonder what kind of guy Ryu or Kazuya Mishima would be if their stories weren't full of dudes being extremely mean to them. Maybe they'd find ways of using their bodies that didn't involve fighting. And if they didn't, they'd at least have more fun. Maybe Ryu could relax his shoulders a bit. Maybe Kazuya would be able to smile serenely without throwing his dad off a cliff first. I think it would be more fun. In a world where more real and fictional fighters were free to wander off that set path, characters like Voldo would stand out less, but maybe that would be okay. So that's what's up with Voldo. He is a graceful, leathery little man. He's a bundle of questions and contradictions patched together from centuries of queer culture and masculine rule. Now, it's time to hop onto Reddit and check my math on this one. No, he's just Italian.